from a co-pilot who made the decision to end more than 149 lives. An airplane that was mistakenly attacked with a missile mid-flight. Even a plane that caught fire mid-flight was filmed by several tourists. What you're about to see are the top 7 terrifying plane moments that changed aviation forever. Starting with the first, when a plane was warned of a civil war, became involved in the conflict, and was mistakenly destroyed in mid-air. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 took off from Amsterdam heading to Kuala Lumpur, but it never made it. Just 3 hours later, the aircraft vanished from radar over eastern Ukraine. What happened next shocked the entire world and permanently changed the rules of flying over conflict zones. MH17 was a Boeing 777, cruising at 33,000 feet, flying a route used by dozens of international airlines that same week. The crew was calm, the weather was perfect, and the aircraft was in excellent condition. But beneath that airspace, a violent conflict was unfolding on the ground. Armed groups were fighting for control of the region, and both sides had access to surface-to-air missile systems. At 1:20 p.m. UTC, without warning, a Buk surface-to-air missile was launched from rebel-controlled territory. The missile locked onto the aircraft's heat signature and struck the forward section of the fuselage. The explosion instantly incapacitated the crew, destroyed critical systems, and caused the plane to break apart mid-air. Fragments were scattered over 50 square kilometers, and every person on board, 298 people, including families, researchers, and children, lost their lives instantly. The images of debris fields across sunflower fields in Ukraine became one of the most haunting scenes in modern aviation. The investigation was one of the most complex in aviation history. The Dutch Safety Board concluded that MH17 was mistakenly targeted by a Buk missile transported into the region the same day. The aircraft was flying at an altitude considered safe, but conflict zone intelligence was incomplete, and commercial aviation authorities hadn't fully assessed the real threat. In simple terms, the crew did nothing wrong. The aircraft had no failures. The route was technically approved, but the risk was underestimated, and MH17 became a tragic victim of a war it had nothing to do with. The event forced airlines worldwide to radically change how they evaluate overflight risks, creating new protocols to avoid active conflict zones, even at high altitudes. And although this accident was one of the most chaotic, the next one, just minutes before landing, ended with Asiana Airlines Flight 214 crashing to the ground. On July 6, 2013, dozens of phones, airport cameras, and long-range lenses recorded a Boeing 777 approaching San Francisco International Airport. But something was very wrong. As the aircraft descended toward runway 28L, witnesses noticed the jet coming in unusually low, so low that some people thought it might actually touch the water. The engines roared as the crew tried to correct the glide path, but the aircraft continued sinking dangerously. In the final seconds, the nose pitched up sharply, a desperate attempt to gain altitude. But it was too late. The 777 struck the seawall at the edge of the runway, shearing off the landing gear and ripping the tail section from the fuselage. Cameras captured the moment the aircraft slammed into the ground, cartwheeled, and slid violently down the runway in a cloud of debris and fire. The footage became one of the most analyzed crash videos in aviation history, a moment of pure terror recorded from multiple angles. Inside the cabin, passengers were thrown against seats and walls as the cabin twisted and tore open. Despite the chaos, many survivors later described a sudden, eerie silence right after the impact, followed by screams, flames, and the desperate rush to escape before the fire spread. And incredibly, most people on board survived. Why did this crash happen? The investigation found a chain of errors. The flight crew mismanaged the autopilot systems and allowed the aircraft to descend far below the proper glide path. Airspeed dropped dangerously, unnoticed until seconds before impact. By the time they realized they were about to stall, the engines were already too slow to generate the thrust needed for a successful go-around. Confusion about automation, miscommunication in the cockpit, and a reliance on systems the pilots thought were activated but weren't, led the aircraft into an unrecoverable, low-energy, low-altitude state. In the end, a misunderstanding of the aircraft's flight mode and poor situational awareness brought the 777 down in front of hundreds of witnesses. And although accidents are sometimes unintentional, the next one can be considered a suicide attack, where a co-pilot ended the lives of 149 people. We are talking about Germanwings Flight 9525. A man is slamming an axe against the cockpit door. He's screaming, desperate, striking the metal again and again, begging to be let in. But on the other side, there is only silence. Meanwhile, the plane is descending, slowly, steadily, heading straight toward a mountain wall. Air traffic control tries to make contact, no answer. Emergency protocols are triggered, fighter jets are launched, an international alert is issued, but it's already too late. Germanwings 9525 is falling, and inside, 150 people sit, unaware of what's unfolding. What's happening behind that cockpit door? Who is the man wielding the axe? Why is the plane descending? And the most chilling question of all, is there any chance they could survive? This is the real story of one of the darkest moments in modern aviation. A tragedy that left behind more questions than answers. This is the story of Germanwings Flight 9525. Ready? Let's get started. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe. March 24, 2015. Germanwings Flight 9525 departs Barcelona en route to Düsseldorf. On board, 144 passengers and 6 crew members. Families, students, travelers, all unaware that in just 30 minutes, everything will change. In the cockpit, Captain Patrick Sondenheimer, seasoned, respected. And beside him, First Officer Andreas Lubitz, 27 years old, polite, quiet, a man who didn't stand out. To most, he was just another face in the crew. But behind that composed exterior, something far more dangerous was brewing. The flight progresses normally, until the captain steps out of the cockpit for a moment. And in that moment, the fate of Flight 9525 is sealed. The cockpit door is sealed, and the co-pilot is alone. Inside, Andreas Lubitz says nothing. He just breathes, stares ahead, and begins turning the altitude selector. The descent begins. Slow, steady, but aimed directly at the mountains of southern France. Outside, the captain pounds on the door, at first calmly, then desperately. But that door won't open. It's reinforced. And from inside, no one intends to unlock it. The cockpit becomes a cage, and the man holding the key has made his choice. Air traffic control tries to reach the aircraft. No reply. From the radar, a steady descent. Controlled, but mysterious. A technical failure? A depressurization? No one imagines this is happening by design, and that one man is in complete control. The plane isn't flying anymore, it's falling. But not out of control, not in chaos. It's a deliberate descent, calculated, precise. Air traffic controllers grow increasingly anxious. They call again and again, still no reply. The captain keeps trying. He pounds the door with his fists, then with a heavy object, tries to break it down. Inside, Lubitz shows no emotion. His breathing is steady. His hands never leave the controls. The passengers remain calm. There's no warning, no turbulence, just a gentle, steady descent, as if everything is normal. On the ground, an alert is issued. 2 French fighter jets scramble to intercept the flight. But time is running out. Altitude drops below 10,000 feet and continues falling. Ahead, the jagged peaks of the French Alps. Seconds remain. And still, no one can open that door. The aircraft is now below 6,000 feet. The captain keeps trying to force the door, but there's no time left. Inside the cockpit, Lubitz breathes calmly. No words, no panic. Just his hands on the controls. At 10:41 a.m., Germanwings Flight 9525 crashes into the French Alps at 700 kilometers per hour. Everyone on board dies instantly. What you're about to hear is a real fragment from the cockpit voice recorder. Listener discretion is advised. In the days that followed, the world demanded answers. What went wrong? How could one man decide the fate of 150 people? The black boxes revealed a haunting truth. Andreas Lubitz had crashed the plane on purpose. He had been treated for severe mental health issues. There were medical records advising against flying, but he hid his condition, and no one saw the signs. Lubitz wasn't a technical failure. He was a human blind spot, a silence that cost lives. After the investigation, cockpit protocols changed, requiring 2 people in the flight deck at all times, but those changes came too late. On that mountain slope, only flowers remain, crosses, names. 150 lives, taken mid-journey. Parents, children, stories that were never allowed to finish. And although this accident forced airlines to conduct psychological tests on their pilots, the next one forced them to check passengers' luggage. We're talking about Pan Am Flight 103. It was a cold December night in 1988. At London's Heathrow Airport, a Pan Am Boeing 747 was preparing for a routine flight to New York. Passengers boarding with smiles, crew checking every detail. Everything seemed normal. No one on that plane, nor on the ground, knew that within minutes, the night sky would erupt in one of the most shocking tragedies in aviation history. A thunderous blast, a flash of light, and suddenly silence shattered by the roar of destruction. Homes burning, streets covered in debris, and 270 lives extinguished in an instant. What could bring down a giant of the skies in mere seconds? Who was behind this act? In the next few minutes, we'll uncover the truth. Because this is the story of Pan Am Flight 103. Heathrow Airport, London. Pan Am Flight 103 is preparing for takeoff to New York. As passengers quietly settle into their seats and the crew makes final checks, in the cargo hold a suitcase unlike the rest is carefully placed. Inside, an explosive device set to detonate mid-flight. No one knows, no one imagines. But from this moment, the clock to disaster has already begun ticking. Pan Am Flight 103 cruises smoothly at over 30,000 feet, leaving England's lights behind as it heads across the Atlantic to New York.
Approaching waypoint Sierra November.
Roger that. Altitude steady.
In the cockpit, the crew chats, checks instruments, and stays on course. Passengers relax. Some read, others sleep, others simply gaze out the window at the moonlit clouds. But deep in the cargo hold, hidden among the luggage, a bomb waits. Its timer moving relentlessly, counting down the seconds to catastrophe. No one knows it, but every sip of coffee, every laugh, every word is taking place under the shadow of a deadly countdown. One that in minutes will seal the fate of everyone on board. But before continuing, if you like this video, please subscribe. It helps me grow and continue making more videos like this. At 7:03 p.m., a flash shatters the calm of the night. A violent explosion tears the Boeing 747 apart midair. Debris engulfed in flames scatters for miles. Bodies fall from the sky. Burning fragments of the aircraft crash onto rooftops, streets, and fields. In the small town of Lockerbie, Scotland, houses burn, the ground shakes, and chaos takes over. In seconds, Pan Am Flight 103 has ceased to exist. What you are about to hear is the actual cockpit voice recorder from the moment of the accident. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'd like to thank you for flying Pan Am, and to wish you a pleasant flight and a happy holiday. How about that for concern, sir? Good evening, Scottish. This is Clipper 103 requesting oceanic clearance.
The roar of the explosion is gone. On the ground, the silence is broken only by distant sirens and cries. Lockerbie has become a battlefield against fire. Houses destroyed, streets covered in twisted metal, and bodies among the debris. Emergency crews work tirelessly, but the magnitude of the tragedy is indescribable. 270 lives lost, including passengers, crew, and townspeople. Amid the devastation, one question grows louder.
Looks like no survivors.
What could destroy an aircraft of this size in mid-air? The investigation is only beginning. And what they will uncover reveals an act of horror planned with precision. The investigation revealed the truth. The explosion was no accident. In the cargo hold, a bomb hidden inside a suitcase had destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 mid-flight. The device had been loaded into checked luggage during its connection at Frankfurt Airport, before arriving in London. After years of investigation and international pressure, authorities held Abdelbasit al-Megrahi, a Libyan intelligence agent, responsible for the attack. The world was shocked. 270 lives taken in seconds by an act of terror calculated with surgical precision. Today, in Lockerbie, a memorial stands in honor of every victim, and of a flight forever remembered as one of the darkest chapters in aviation history. But aside from baggage, one of the things that has most changed the history of aviation is the descent of the aircraft, because many times it ends badly. Like Emirates Flight 521. An explosion rocks Dubai airport, a black cloud rises, and a Boeing 777 is engulfed in flames. Passengers run along the runway, some carrying suitcases, others searching for their children. What exactly happened? Was it a mechanical failure? Human error? What seemed like a routine landing was seconds away from turning into a total tragedy. This is the true story of Emirates Flight 521. Are you ready? Let's get started. August 3rd, 2016. Emirates Flight 521 takes off from southern India bound for Dubai. On board 282 passengers of 20 nationalities and 18 fully trained crew members. The aircraft, a Boeing 777-300, over 12 years in service, maintained to the last detail. In the cockpit, 2 experienced pilots, a captain with over 7,000 flight hours, and an Australian first officer with 3,000 hours. Everything seemed normal until they approached Dubai. As Flight 521 approached Dubai, the atmosphere was stifling. The thermometer read 48 degrees Celsius. Extreme heat, invisible but dangerous. Why? Because hot air is less dense. And when the air is less dense, the engines produce less thrust, the wings generate less lift, and the runways simply become shorter. At that moment, the Boeing 777 needed more runway, more power, and more margin for error. But it wouldn't have it. From the tower, a new risk was already being warned: wind shear. Unpredictable gusts of air can push or slow an aircraft at the most critical moment, landing. Despite everything, the flight was cleared to land on runway 12, and so began a chain of seconds that would change the history of Emirates Flight 521 forever. 2:37 p.m. Dubai time, Emirates Flight 521 lines up with runway 12. The plane is approaching at over 300 kilometers per hour. It touches down, but not at the right spot. Instead of touching down at the start of the runway, it touches down 1,100 meters later, almost halfway down. This is what's known as a long landing. It means the plane has used up part of the runway without touching the ground. The problem? Now there's much less room to brake, and the plane isn't decelerating enough. Then an alert goes off in the cockpit: long landing. The captain reacts immediately and decides what in aviation is called a go-around, an emergency procedure where the landing is aborted to go around and try again. But here's the big problem. For the go-around to work properly, the engines must automatically increase power. However, what few people know is that if a plane has already touched down, even if it's just the rear wheels, the automatic go-around system is deactivated. This is what happened on Flight 521. The rear gear had touched the runway. The engines were still idling. The plane tried to get back into the air, but without power. The pilots raised the nose. They retracted the landing gear, but the engines didn't respond as they expected. For an instant, the Boeing 777 rose barely 25 meters, the height of a 7-story building. 12 seconds later, without speed, without lift, the plane plummeted onto the runway. The rear end hit first. The landing gear was partially retracted. The impact was brutal. The fuselage twisted, the right wing broke, and the fire had already started. The plane skids, it twists, the fuselage fills with smoke. But the crew acts quickly. In less than 90 seconds, all passengers are evacuated. All except 2, the captain and a flight attendant checking the plane for the last time. But it wasn't all heroic. Several passengers halted the evacuation to retrieve suitcases, an action that could have cost lives and generated a wave of worldwide criticism. 9 minutes later, a second explosion. The fire reached the central fuel tank. The aircraft exploded. A firefighter, Jassim Al-Balushi, 27, died while trying to extinguish the fire. He was the only fatality in the accident, a hero who came in just as everyone else was leaving. The official investigation concluded it wasn't a technical failure. It was a combination of poor judgment and overconfidence in the automation. The pilots didn't notice that the auto throttle didn't activate, and when they did, it was too late.
They were trained in simulators, yes, but never for a situation like this, with the plane already touching down. A mistake of seconds, with consequences that lasted for years. Emirates Flight 521 became a global case study, not because of the destruction, but because of what was prevented. 300 people survived. One man lost his life to save others, and the lesson remains. In aviation, a split second changes everything. Fly safe, stay curious.
But accidents aren't always the fault of human error. Sometimes Mother Nature has created accidents that leave their mark on history. Like Ethiopian Airlines Flight 409. In the early hours of January 25, 2010, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 409 prepared for its nighttime departure out of Beirut. The Boeing 737 was scheduled for a routine flight to Addis Ababa. Passengers boarded quietly, the cabin still dim, the mood calm. But outside, the weather was already turning against them. Strong winds, dense clouds, and a coastline swallowed in darkness. As the aircraft lifted off the runway, the first signs of trouble appeared just seconds later. Radar controllers noticed an unusual deviation in the climb. Instead of a smooth ascent, the aircraft began banking left and right aggressively. Witnesses along the Lebanese coast said they saw a ball of fire twisting in the sky, not realizing they were watching a Boeing 737 fighting for its life. Inside the cockpit, confusion was building. The aircraft's instruments were detecting rapid changes in attitude, but the pilots were struggling to interpret the data in the harsh weather environment. The night was pitch black. No visual reference, no horizon, only rain and wind hammering the windshield. It was the perfect setup for spatial disorientation. As the minutes passed, the oscillations grew more violent. The nose pitched up sharply, then dropped. The wings rocked from side to side. A nearby coastal surveillance camera captured the aircraft as a faint, glowing shape against the night sky, rising, turning, then suddenly dipping downward. In those final moments, the pilots attempted one last correction, but it was too late. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 409 entered a steep, uncontrolled dive toward the Mediterranean Sea. Seconds later, the camera recorded a bright flash as the aircraft impacted the water, ending the flight instantly. All 90 people on board were lost. The investigation concluded that severe spatial disorientation, combined with heavy weather and lack of situational awareness, caused the crew to lose control shortly after takeoff. It was Lebanon's deadliest aviation accident. And finally, we will talk about an accident on the Asian continent, when a plane encountered various winds that caused it to plummet towards its final destination. We are talking about China Eastern Airlines Flight MU5735. On March 21, 2022, China Eastern Airlines Flight MU5735 was cruising at altitude on a routine domestic flight from Kunming to Guangzhou. The Boeing 737-800 was carrying 132 people, and nothing unusual had been reported by the crew. Then, without any warning, the aircraft suddenly entered a near vertical dive. Radar data showed the plane dropping from cruising altitude to the ground in just over a minute. Passengers and crew had almost no time to react. The aircraft briefly leveled off once before plunging again, this time at extreme speed, disappearing from radar completely. The impact occurred in a mountainous, forested area of Guangxi province. There was no distress call, no Mayday. When rescue teams arrived, the wreckage was scattered across the hillside, confirming what many feared. There were no survivors. The footage of the aircraft's final descent, captured by security cameras and shared globally, shocked the aviation world. A modern passenger jet had fallen from the sky in a way rarely seen in commercial aviation. The investigation into Flight MU5735 became one of the most sensitive and closely watched in recent history. Early findings ruled out weather, mid-air collision, and known mechanical failures common to the Boeing 737-800. Flight data indicated intentional control inputs, suggesting the aircraft was deliberately pushed into a dive. This raised the possibility of human intervention from inside the cockpit, a conclusion that deeply unsettled investigators and pilots worldwide. However, Chinese authorities released limited information, and no final public report fully detailing the cause has been issued. This lack of transparency has fueled speculation, but aviation experts agree on one point: the flight profile does not match an accidental loss of control. China Eastern Flight MU5735 remains one of the most disturbing aviation tragedies of the modern era, not only because of how fast it happened, but because it challenged the belief that such sudden, unexplained dives belonged to the past.